Okay, so now I know what my right statistics are. The second thing is my data accurate? And I'm going to tell you, this is one that you really need to spend a lot of time on.
This is the PMP Industry Insider Podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome out to another episode of the PMP Industry Insider Podcast, where we take a look at what is changing in the pest and lawn industries, and we take you to the front lines to those that are driving those changes. As always, I'm Donnie, Shelton, owner of Triangle Home Services, which has Triangle Pests and Triangle Lawn. And with me is the ever-present, ever-accurate Mr. Dan Gordon. Dan, would you like to say good morning where you're at? It's afternoon where I'm at. Our sponsors, our new program, and our topic.
So here I am in sunny, actually it's not sunny yet, Hawaii, because it's nice and early in the morning because we wanted to do this at noontime. So I'm here at 6 o'clock in the morning doing this, but it's that I enjoy being with Donnie so much that anyway, for sure. So anyway, Dan Gordon, PCO Bookkeepers and M&A specialists, CFO services, bookkeeping, brokerage services, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, we've been talking about the news that we've expanded our offerings to peer groups in partnership with industry veteran David Billingsley. We've actually put several groups together already over this. To learn more, go back and listen to episode number 136 or visit pmpindustryinsider.com/peer groups. Also, our sponsors, as always, Coalmarch by WorkWave for all of your marketing needs, not just digital. And that would be coalmarch.com. And for your insurance needs, for workers' comp, for auto, for general liability, and for several others, that would be pestsure.com. So today, we're going to talk about something near and dear to my heart, and I think really near and dear to Donnie's heart. And this is going to be a Danny and Donnie episode, and we're going to talk about business intelligence, dashboard reporting, the importance of data integrity. Just wrote an article for my monthly column in PMP that addresses this. But I wrote this little intro because I think it's really important, because what I'm seeing out there is a lot of consultants and whatnot in the industry who use these beautiful programs, and they produce awesome graphs and charts. So charts, graphs, cool interactive elements are all part of the new age of information reporting that many consultants in accounting, including PCO bookkeepers, are using to track key performance indicators and business trends and financial insights for clients. So the programs are colorful, cool, and allow for easy interpretation of data. But what happens when the dashboard software is fed inaccurate information? So today we're going to talk about the accuracy of data imported into these online dashboards, in particular financial information for presentation. So, Donnie, I gave a bunch of questions and whatnot, but there's a few out there: Business BI, Domo, Clipfolio, and one that's pretty cool that we've been working with for about a year called Fathom. Let's kind of go into that.
Well, it's kind of funny that we're doing this topic because I have had a fairly, meaning in the last 3 weeks, raw experience with this. And if you want to, first of all, I would say intelligence and my name in the same sentence is probably an oxymoron. But having said all of that, I'm going to share a quick experience I just had recently. You know, one of the things we're talking about KPIs, I feel like this is such a rabbit hole. And mainly because of there's a big difference between information and insight. And I feel like in general, technology has driven this massive run towards information. And we've lost this idea of insight as to what it means. It's like, it's great that you can tell me how many times a wheel is going to turn before an airplane gets off the ground. But if you can't tell me like when it's going to get off the ground, that's a big problem, right? Especially if I run out of runway. And so I say that to say this. So I had an experience where we are currently, meaning Triangle, we're moving to a data warehouse, and we're using all kinds of, you've seen it, Dan. You saw it in one of our peer groups where
it's pretty cool.
Cool. Yeah. So we're combining data from different data sources. We're combining it from our CRM, We're combining it from Podium, which is our review platform. We're combining it from basically any, paychecks or payrolls, anything and everything that touches the business. We're able to pull it into this data warehouse. And so it has taken some time to kind of set up all of these data sources and get them automated and get it so it's feeding this data warehouse consistently. Usually all of them are updated at least every couple of hours. And so I'd gotten to this part of the project, and now I'm ready to start generating dashboards. And so the data is overwhelming. I mean, it's just absolutely overwhelming.
Before you continue, talk about like a data warehouse, what it is and so if everything were on one platform, you wouldn't need a data warehouse, right? But what this does is it kind of brings it all in so that you can draw on that data, right?
Yeah. So there's several platforms out there that do this, but essentially you can almost think of it as your own business database where you can bring in several different disparate data sources. So we use call tracking metrics. We pull in all of our data from that. We use Podium. We pull in all of our data from that. We use QuickBooks. We pull in all of our data from that. We use Google Ads. We use Paychecks. We pull in, and then of course our CRM. We pull all of that data into one place that we can now start mixing data sources together to grab insight. So an example of that would be when we look at our technicians. How many stops are they doing? How many skips are they doing? What is their cancel rate? How many leads are they submitting? How many reviews are they sending? How many of those reviews are actually coming back? Of that, what's their average rating? Is it 4-star, 5-star? So it's a way to kind of pull all of this together to get this macro view of what's going on. And this is the whole idea behind information and insight, because it's easy to get like these little bits of information. It's very powerful when you can pull it all together and get kind of this much bigger view of what's happening. So anyway, so I'm into this place.
But the information that you bring from your CRM PestPack or from QuickBooks, it has to be accurate. Your payroll, you can't look at just technicians if Paychecks or whoever you're using is not carved up by division, and so the data warehouse has to know which employees are technicians, right? So
we're gonna get to that. We're going to get to that.
Yeah.
So I'm here and I'm deciding, okay, well, let me take a look at, now I've got to build these dashboards, and that's in of itself is kind of overwhelming. It's like, what should we report on? Like, what's really, and so I'm like, well, at the end of the day, in Traction, they have this whole idea of an accountability chart, right? And the idea behind an accountability chart is that every position should have anywhere no more than 3 to 5 major accountabilities. So I'm like, well, that makes sense. So we'll go to the accountability chart. And then from that accountability chart, we'll decide on these are going to be the basics that we're going to report on. Well, I go to the accountability chart, and it turns out that I didn't have an accountability chart. I had an org chart.
It works much better when you don't have an accountability.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I had an org chart, didn't have an accountability chart, which was like, that was my first problem. And then I went from that to say, okay, well, now we need to fix that. And then I go to our position agreements. And, I think I've told this story. So I go to our position agreements, and like if for example, let's just say inside salesperson. What do you think a number one job of an inside salesperson should be, Dan?
Selling.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just hold that thought. What do you think the number one job of an outside salesperson should be?
Selling.
Okay, great. That makes sense to me. But on our position agreements, it said to treat and service pests for Triangle Pest Control customers. That's what it said.
That would be a technician.
That would be a technician. So what I realized, so bringing this back, what I realized is that, and when we talk about data and we talk about accuracy, the very first thing that I realized that we were not doing is to clearly define this is the insight that I need for this position versus this is the information. And so you started this with, hey, a lot of folks can create a lot of pretty graphs, and there's a lot of, look, I can go on analytics, Google Analytics, and tell you what such and such is watching at 8 p.m. at night has absolutely nothing to do with how many leads I'm going to get the next day. Right. So my point is that, I think the very first thing that we need to talk about is like, what is the insight that you need to have? And then from that, you're 100% accurate, which is now, how do I get that insight? Because a lot of times what you'll find is that people are very good at reporting data. They're not so good at validating that that's the right data and that the right data is accurate. And that's the hard part, right? I mean, that's the
From an
real
accounting perspective, it is so you can use these like this Fathom, visit them, fathomhq.com. They're pretty cool. But if you're an accountant and you're importing this information and the information is bad, you're going to get pretty graphs and charts and information, but you've got to have a CPA who has industry experience push it into this program, or otherwise you're going to get bad information and that's going to cause you to make bad decisions, and you're not going to grow your business. But and we can talk about like some of these off the shelf programs. Some of these KPIs have absolutely no relevance to our industries or to pest control and lawn care, and some we have our own KPIs within the industry that we have to build. So it's important stuff to make sure that the data is proper.
The other thing too, I would say is, one of the things that, and I've mentioned this before, and Dan, maybe you can cut me a check later on for saying this, but one of the things I really like about PCO is that oftentimes when you're comparing numbers, what people don't do is they don't validate assumptions. So they'll say, hey, my gross margin is this. And you're like, man, that's a fantastic gross margin. But then you start asking questions like, well, do you put insurance in cost of goods sold? No.
Yeah.
Do you put gas and and fuel? I mean, fuel and like service. Oh, no. We put that in. And so you want to be careful about that. And so when I say validate assumptions, like, one of the key things, especially in financial reporting, I think, is making sure that you're pretty clear on your chart of accounts. And before you do any kind of comparison, like, well, the industry average is this and your average is that, a fundamental question you need to ask is, am I comparing the same data set here? Because oftentimes, if you're not doing that, you're not getting an accurate.
So the cool thing about what we do is we require, and we've been doing this almost 20 years. We require our clients to pretty much have the same charts of accounts so that we can do comparative. And we've got some of the biggest and best companies as clients in the industry. Our clients make up well over $1.2 billion in revenue, annualized revenue. So we have this information. We're not just comparing it against these, smaller companies that may or may not have, good KPIs. But KPIs should be compared historically against yourself, not just against the industry. So how are you doing historically? Then you compare them against your budget for actual to budget, and then you go to industry data like ours, or there's some other data providers out there. But I think that ours is pretty slick because we're kind of set up. Our chart of accounts pretty much line up with a lot of the big boys, but we've developed it over the years. So it's interesting stuff.
Right. So let's get into a couple of these KPIs that you really need to know. I spent, well, this, Dan, I spent the last quarter teaching my managers and my leaders which ones are really important and what game we're really playing. And I get tickled because if you want an eye-opening experience, walk into your leadership team tomorrow and say, if you had to put one number as to whether or not we're winning or losing a game of business, what would that one number be? And if you get everyone to say the exact same number, not the number itself, but the exact same measurement,
the KPI, yeah,
you need to call me and I will give you something. A gift card. I have yet to do this and have, even in my own team, which is why I did the training. Most people are not super clear. At the end of the day, when you're in business, you're absolutely playing a game. It is absolutely a game, and you have to view it that way. Like a football game, a basketball game, whatever.
And this is a box score. That's exactly what it is.
There's a single score that defines if you are winning or losing. Now, that single score may be different depending on your goals. For me, it's operational cash flow, right? That's my number one. But all I'm saying is that if you're playing a game and not everyone can agree on what the score is, meaning not what that measurement is, or even the number, and don't know how to calculate it. I mean, that's like watching Pop Warner football, right? Where they hike the ball and then everyone just rushes the ball because no one knows what's going on. And so I'm being dead serious. If you're listening to this tomorrow, just go in and ask, hey, what's the number one number that defines if we're winning or losing? And so
And
again,
again, what you just said is important because it may be like, so I look at operational. What's that? Operationally, it's gross margin, right? Sales is, your sales to sales made, or marketing, your cost per lead, cost per sale, and your G&A, right? But yours is kind of goes all the way down and says operational cash flow. That entails everything that I've just mentioned,
yeah,
but you have to have each of those components proper before you can get to that operational cash flow, or otherwise the whole thing's a fiction.
right. And let me just define that real quick for our audience if you're confused on what the operational cash flow is. And I'm going to tell you how Donnie calculates it. Now, I'm doing this knowingly that I've got an antagonist CPA on this podcast with me right now. So I'm just going to watch his facial expressions and see how much he cringes. But this is how I define it. So if I take my revenue and I take out my profit, okay, that's going to give me net income. I'm not profit, my expenses. I'm already screwing up. So take my revenue minus my expenses. That's going to give me profit. Now there are other things that I need to pay in the business. So now we got taxes to worry about, and we've got notes to take care of. So once
notes, meaning vehicle debt, correct, for the most part in our business.
Yeah, any kind of debt payoff that we have. I'm fortunate that all we have to deal with are vehicles. But so now I've got my profit. I'm going to take out my vehicle payments, and then I'm going to take out my tax load, which in the case may be 40 to 45%, depending on where you're at. After that, that's my operational cash flow. Now, let me tell you why I view this as the number one statistic for, at least for my business, is because if I was in a growth mode and I wanted to grow the business to say $100 million, I would not be using this number because I could never make profit, right? What I would be using would be sales would be my number one goal. Right. But what I'm interested in is a sustainable business that's growing and it's very, very healthy and it can sustain itself. The reason I use OCF is because now I know the business is in a place that it can manage itself and it can put cash in the bank. So if I were, again, you can pick your number one number. That's my number one number. But all I'm saying is that you could absolutely be making a profit and still go out of business. Right. That's why I like
OCF. So one of the things that if you've seen our reports, we use something called the Rule of 23. The Rule of 23, I didn't make it up. It's an Orkin thing that they put into place many years ago that how they judge their branch managers. And basically you're going to either do 23% growth or 23% profit or some combination there of 13-10. Now, when you and I got together, you decided not to call it the Rule of 23, but just call it a composite, and then took it up to like 30.
I did.
Right. And we have clients who are doing 30 or better. But think about so why is that number important? Oh, wow, that's great. But the reason it's important is because it shows you if you're going to do that 23% growth, most likely you're not going to have a whole lot of profit. Or if you're going to do the 23% profit or whatever the numbers are, right, you're most likely not going to have the growth. So it shows you that balance of where you want to be, because you're right. If a lot of these companies that are growing like crazy are not profitable, but there's an end game in mind. You understand that, right? But if you're in it to make a living and then ultimately exit, when the time comes, you need to make a profit, right? Because that's how you put food on the table for your family,
Right. One of the things that, and I know we're going to get to this later, oftentimes I feel like a lot of folks will jump right to statistics and they'll jump right to graphs and charts and those types of things. But what they don't do, okay, so we talked about at the very beginning, which is information versus insight. So it's number one, picking the right things to look at. The second piece that needs to happen before you jump to graphs and charts and a bunch of other stuff is, okay, so now I know what my right statistics are. The second thing is my data accurate? And I'm going to tell you, this is one that you really need to spend a lot of time on. I mean, for me, I know I've mentioned this in the podcast. We're on our third CRM conversion, and I'm never doing this again. I am never doing this again because we finally just gotten a place now where I feel really good about our data. And it took us almost 6 months to get there, maybe even a little bit longer, mainly because the data from the conversion wasn't accurate. We had some procedural things that were not quite right, where people were putting things in that were not accurate. And the way that all started was like, okay, this is the definition. Like, you're going to laugh, Dan, you'll probably laugh at this, but I legitimately had a class with my managers, and it was definitions. This is a lead, and it is defined. It's in a handbook now.
That's so important. No, that is
Yeah.
absolutely important.
Yeah. Like,
you know,
because there was so many different definitions. Like, oh, I don't put that in. That, like, they didn't need service. I'm like, no, they called, right? It is a lead.
Right.
It's just we couldn't service. So my point is like, there's this whole idea of like, okay, this is what I need to track. And then it's a whole nother project to make sure that so then this is what is important. How do I get accurate, and how do I stay accurate? And I'm not joking. I had a full meeting on just definitions of like, again, this is what a lead is. This is what a callback is. This is what, and it was a contentious meeting. It took us almost 2 hours to get through it. It was just kind of crazy. Like, I have 10 managers.
No, but it's really, really important because, somebody may have in their mind a different definition. And that way, when they put the data in, right, they're not putting in the data that you think that they're putting in, and then you're getting bad data. The other thing is, from an accounting perspective, like what we do is that, we obviously, present monthly reports at the end of the month, but that's the culmination of the process of the bank reconciliation, the journal entry to journalize sales and revenues, payments and accounts receivable from the CRM to QuickBooks, to journalize payroll, to do all of this stuff. And if that's not done right, then you're way off, right? But what's interesting is, there's some of the consultants say, well, you should have dashboards that you can look at daily or weekly. And I agree on the operational side, the stuff that you're pulling out of your CRM. You never look at accounting data or your P&L mid-month, because if it's not done, it's not meaningful. You might not have a payroll in there. You might not have, so people who look at their P&L and geez, I want that P&L every week. Well, then you have to do a closeout every week if that's what you want to do. You can't look at accounting has silos, and once the silo is closed, then you can look at it, but you can't look at it week to week. So that's important.
Well, I think the other piece of that is that we do forecasting, and we like to see how we're trending for the month, and how we're trending for the quarter, and how we're trending for the year. But you're right. I mean, I don't take anything to the bank, for lack of a better term there, and no pun intended, but obviously all the financial information is looking back. I'm an entrepreneur, right? That's how I think. I'm looking at where's the ball going, and are we trending in the right spot, and are we low, are we high, what changes do we need to make? And that trending piece, that forecast, it's a little tricky, and it takes time. I mean, it takes literally, probably, at least for us, it took us almost a year to get good at it, because there's things that pop up that you don't know. There's things that were in the budget last year that are,
right.
It's always changing.
By the way, you can do revenue all throughout the month. That's in sales, and you could do, project out your payroll, but you can't put it all together until it's closed out. You can't look at a P&L, because you will be surprised once that month end is closed. So it's important that you understand when to look at your data and what data to look at. That's very, very important.
Right. Yeah. The other thing is like how you look at your data. I am in a weird spot this year that I don't like. And that is, whenever I look at data, it's all about context, right? I don't care about dollars. I shouldn't say I don't care about dollars, but if someone gives me a revenue number, and this is what we're going to do in revenue for the year or for the month or for the week, I mean, I don't really care. It has no significance without relevance. And so I like to look at, okay, this is our revenue, this is our goal, and this is what we did last year. I always like to have historical and goal with my numbers, mainly so that I can see, are we growing? Are we getting better? How are we doing this compared to last year? And what does that mean? I know that we had written here on our outline just the importance of looking at company history. I think that is critical, because, your numbers are not always going to line up with the industry. There might be something specific in your market that you have to deal with that others don't. I think about, like, we don't deal with rats that much here. I know for some folks, that's a huge book of
Pacific
business.
Northwest. That's
right. Yeah. I mean, but the reality of it is that, when you have really good, accurate data, and you've got like years of good historical data, I mean, forecasting gets super easy. I mean, back in the day before we did all of we did our CRM tour, we would do a forecast, and we never was more than 1 or 2% off our forecast because we had such good data. You know what I mean?
Well, the reason that you can do that, right, is because the forecasting is a 3-piece pie, right? The first piece is your route work that if you have 0% attrition, to the penny what you're going to do. The second is the renewals, same thing. And the third piece of the pie are those new sales, right? And so if you can, I have 5 salespeople who are going to get this many leads and close at this percentage, you can back right into it. So you can get really, really accurate. I'll tell you what's interesting with some of the new things that people are doing, right? So in the industry, and you're doing this, right? You're doing monthly billing, right? So on the first of the month, your CRM records all that revenue, right? So if you say, I want to do $100,000 this month, well, probably on the second day, if I run a sales report, I've done $80,000 of revenue. Well, you haven't. So you got to look at production, not at revenue, right? Because your revenue is not recognized ratably the way it's supposed to. And some people, get into this false sense of we're having a great month. Well, you're having a great month because you charged all your clients the first of the month, So
yeah, and we look at both. I mean, we grade our technicians against production, and we grade obviously what's going to hit the bank. I mean, that's an important stat to know as well, because production does not equal, and I've had this discussion so many times, production does not equal our bill out, especially once you start doing monthly billing. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It's just, and some things to watch on that is that, and this is just an aside, this is not so much about data integrity. This is more just being a good operator. Word to the wise, be very careful with this. You need to balance out your production, because monthly billing will hide like these peaks and valleys in production.
Absolutely.
And we've seen it, because you're like, oh yeah, man, our revenue is just so solid. And meanwhile,
we're
you got
killing
some
it.
months, yeah, and your production, some months are just off the charts because it lines up with May or June or whatever these heavy months are.
Right.
And then you got other months that are just like, so all I'm telling you is that you may want to consider putting some sort of process in place at least once a year. You rebalance that production, because you will not see that in bill outs. So just be careful with that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's recent, because we just had that happen. We had to go back through and do a rebalance.
No, it's important. It's now that more and more companies are doing this, monthly billing, just subscription thing, which is terrific. I love it. But you got to understand what the risks are in looking at the data, so that you've got to normalize it to make sure that you're able to understand how it works. But it's pretty interesting stuff.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about, so we've talked about information versus insight. We've talked about picking the right data to look at. We've talked about the importance of making sure that data is accurate and building the systems to keep that data accurate, which is, you would be shocked at how hard that is. We've talked about defining your terms, making sure that everyone's on the same page as to, because that's going to be part of keeping the data accurate, right? Is keeping everyone on the same page. And you can do that through systems and procedures, but I promise you, it's something that you constantly have to go back and remind folks, especially when it comes to leads or things where people have to make a hard decision that this counts or doesn't. I mean, even with we have CTM right now, but even then there's still a human that has to mark that call. If it comes in even if it comes in on a lead line, meaning that it's a track number, well, current customers call those lines as well. I mean, it's not like, someone has to make that decision. So there's a training component on that, and there's a valuation. I would say the next thing, and before we get into dashboards, is that we build a lot of audits at Triangle. At one point we used to have them really, really well, and then we went through, but we're getting back to that. And the reason is because you would be surprised, it just a few audits, how much time and effort it saves you, and how critical that is to keeping your data clean. Because again, you can go through, and I'm sure you've never had this, Dan, where you went through and you cleaned someone's books up, and then a year later they're back at the same spot.
Never had. A lot of times, well, if we're doing the work, then no. But if somebody wants us to, a watered down version of what we do. But I'll tell you what's interesting is you can tell the health of a company by their accounts receivable. And I don't mean the balance, I mean the age, right? Because remember, for every dollar that's in that accounts receivable, I've recognized revenue, right? So we'll walk into a company that does $1 million or $2 million of annualized revenue with $1 million receivable that's, 5 years old. Well, what they did, they're not as good as they think they are, or otherwise they would have collected that money. So that's important, right? That's very, very important.
Right. Why don't we switch gears now? Why don't we talk a little bit about kind of industry research and talk about industry data and really metricing or comparing yourself to other data sets. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Dan? And just kind of like, I know for me,
Sure.
like I said earlier that I did a class on financials, and I did a class on this is what winning the game looks like, and here's what's critical, and here's the insight that we need in picking the critical numbers to look at. We actually used your cost study to do that. And what I did was I went through, which I think I shared the slides with you, so you saw them, but I took, this is what is important in the industry, just so that everyone on my leadership team knows that. Then I said, okay, now here's where triangle is, and then here's where the industry is. And, I asked, so I just got through with my previous round of state of the company meetings. And anytime every quarter I do state of the company, I go to Raleigh and I go to Houston and I go to Charlotte, and I do it wherever we have branches. And I meet with all my managers and I asked them, I was like, what did you think of the class? And almost all of them, there was only two who didn't, said, I really enjoyed the part where you showed us, here's what's important as far as like numbers, and here's where we're at, and here's where we are in comparison to the industry, because it made me understand why we do what we do. So do you want to talk a little bit about the Blair and kind of like the cost study and how that all comes together?
Let's start with the cost study, because we're actually, it's interesting that cost study was done in 2019 and people say, well, why don't you update it every year? And the fact of the matter is your labor percentage is your labor percentage in 2019, 2020, 2022, whatever, 23, whatever. But we're actually going to be updating it for 2023. And I'll tell you why. Because the numbers, because of inflation, have gotten bigger, right? So my labor percentage might be 22.5%, right? Like it's always been and should have been, right? However, my route values have increased because of my price increases to keep up with inflation. So what is, an acceptable or a best in class route, 5 years ago might have been 200, 220,000. Now it's 260 to 300, right? That's where it should be. So we're actually going to, in 2024, we're going to re-release the cost study. But the cost study was, I think 130 or so of our clients. And we pushed some out so that we, the largest of our clients we didn't include because they would have, if you take averages, they kind of skew the data, and the smallest as well. And what we came up with is a cost study. What should labor look like? And not just should it look like for the industry, but for residential, for commercial, for wood destroying, and for other services. What should, your marketing spend be? What should, all of these various KPIs. And what's interesting? So Rollins is probably the only pure pest play, right? So Rentokil has other, services. Ecolab, they're into a ton of things, right? And those are public companies that you can look at their SEC filings. The problem with those SEC filings is you can't drill down as far as we drill down, but you can look at their gross margins, and you can look at the gross margins in our cost study. And what's really, really interesting is that our cost study kind of lines up with Rollins pretty well. And Rollins is one of the best in class companies out there. I mean, they just do a fantastic job, right? So the cost study allows you to operate or look at best in class companies and how they operate. And one of the things, so you might be able to break it into quadrants. Well, anybody who's $1 million and less, or $1 million to 5 million and whatnot. And I'm not sure that that's all that important. What you're looking to do is to be with the big boys, right? And our client base, again, over $1.2 billion of annualized revenue, we're able to put that together. And so they're there aren't too many data sets out there that I think are better than ours. The other one is our joint venture with William Blair, our friend Tim Mulrooney, who's been on the podcast. We submit data every month. What we do is we take data from all of our clients, we cleanse out all the names and whatnot, and it's just a data set. And he's got these number jockeys that put it all together and tell us how the industry is doing. And, the one thing that I would tell you is, and I like to think that most of our clients are best in class in the industry, right? And so if you look at that growth data, if you look at the charts, they mirror Rentokil and Rollins, and they're a little bit higher because they're smaller companies, right? So if Rollins grows 5%, that's a tremendous amount of money versus Triangle, right? So Triangle could grow 10% or 15%, but the correlation in the graph is really uncanny. It's pretty cool. And so that's how you can take a look at how the industry's doing. Now, we had Dave Giannetto on our episode. We recorded it last week. I don't know when it'll air, or no, it dropped this week, right? And some of his data is kind of interesting too, because he has best in class companies, but he's also has, one man operations or one woman operations, and they're not best in class. Not saying that the size, but they have companies. Anybody can buy PestPac or, and so what he's seeing is kind of interesting with that lower end, that they're not doing as well as the upper echelon. But I think that those who are using this information that we have and others have, to validate what they're doing, I think that they're going to succeed. And especially now, you've got these. I don't even know what you call it. Is it a recession? Is it inflation? We haven't defined these economic times, and it's funny because looking back on it, we're going to say, oh yeah, that was the slight recession or the inflation. But right now, going through it is it's a little scary, but pest control is doing great. And if you look at our data, I think that, that's a really, really strong thing that you can share with your leadership team and also aspire to be. So.
Well, I will tell you, we are going to do an episode on the economy, and I'm going to say, I think we are in a recession for our industry. And the reason is I'm not going to run us off. We're here talking about data and dashboards, and I want to keep it on that, but it's just fresh in my mind because I talked about this in our state of the company. If you look at who are getting pink slips, it's our target demographic. And if you look at what our revenue growth is as an industry as compared to average price increases last year, what it's showing you is that basically price increases are saving our butt. The industry, I think, is flat.
Absolutely. Yep.
But we'll
customer counts are flat.
Yeah, that's another. We'll talk about that in another episode. But so we've done all the, so we've gone through the process now, and now it's time to display it. For me personally, I like dashboards and I like graphs. I particularly like graphs because I can look at something in 3 seconds when I'm seeing previous year and I'm seeing goal and I'm seeing where we're at. And in 3 seconds, I can get a really good handle on where the business is at. It probably has a lot to do with my background and what I do, for my hobbies. But I've got other folks in my business who loves looking at, they like looking at data grids and they like looking at, just a basic table. But I think the reality of it is that, and I think probably the entire point of this specific episode is that when you think about dashboards and you think about graphs, that is like the tip of the iceberg. That's the only, like, there's so much more that it is below the waterline that has to be right. That's got to be correct for those things to even make any sense whatsoever. Because I'll tell you right now, in the absence of accurate data, it's better not to have the data at all, because at the end of the day, you're going to make dumb decisions based on assumptions that you've not questioned or you've not validated. And that's just as bad as just making it up. In fact, you might even be better making it up.
Well, no, sometimes what you see, especially with accounting data, right? If that's not accurate, you might hand those financials to a banker and you're basically committing bank fraud. You might decide to do your taxes with that information if it's not accurate. And that's, you're not going to get your proper taxes. And some people would say that's a good thing or it's a bad thing, but the law says you got to do it, right? So a skilled accountant will do taxes and will reduce that tax liability best that he can using various techniques. But he's got to have accurate data. So it's really important to understand, especially if your accounting firm should be staffed by CPAs who understand our industry, who understand the tax picture, not just preparing taxes, but doing tax planning and understanding what's going on. So it's extremely important that an accounting firm does that whole package for you, because otherwise you're not going to get accurate financial data, right? And the operational data is really important. And like you said, it's all about definitions, right?
Yeah, it is. It is. We got to get close to wrapping up here, but there's a couple of things I want to say before we finish out. And the first one is if there's any interest, just drop us a line on YouTube or however it is that you consume the podcast. But I would love to go through our data warehouse and how it all works. We are generating some really cool dashboards now, and it's all automated and it's working quite well. I'm not taking a victory lap, but I will tell you that it is way better than it's ever been. So that's kind of the first thing. The second thing is that what I'm super excited about, and this is kind of my next project, because I've been working on this one for a bit, Dan. My next project is I want to start using AI to create where the ball is going. Again, as an entrepreneur, it's important
that my data,
it's good that I know what we did. It's good that, obviously my data being accurate, but I'm always wondering like, where are we going and where is it going to be at in a month, where we're going to be at in 6 months, where we're going to be next year. And so it's amazing. I think it would be great to do an episode on looking and going through some of these tools. And by the way, I don't have this figured out yet. This is kind of my next big project, which is I want to start plugging in some of these predictive AI programs to start looking at our financials, start looking at operational data that's coming out of this data warehouse because to me, if I can know where the ball is going to be at in 6 months or even a year, and it's pretty accurate, that's pretty powerful, right? I mean,
getting the data warehouse, right. We've had so many clients who have tried it and just said, forget it. I can't do it. Yeah. But to be able to get that right. And
it took a
like you're
bit,
there.
We got it. It took a little bit, but we got it. And if you got any questions, you can always reach out to me and I can walk you through what we did. But all righty, Dan, anything to add before we finish out here?
No, I think this is a really important episode. And I think if you take a look at your data, don't just take a look at, pretty charts and graphs and, off the shelf programs that present the data. If the data is not right, it's no good. You can put pig on, what do they say? Lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig.
Yeah, it's still a pig. So, all righty. Yeah. Well, that's a wrap. Just a reminder, all the resources and topics that we talked about today are available on the podcast website, pmpindustryinsider.com. I'm sure we can link up that cost study if you want to take a look at that as well. Just take a look under show notes. And as I always mention at the end of our episodes, we always love comments, especially if they're positive, and reviews. We want to get this content out to as many people as we can. This is one of our ways that we like to help out the industry. But if you have complaints, concerns, or any kind of general just negativity in general, Dan loves those types of calls, and I ask
just send it to me.
Send them all to him, and then we'll take it from there. And with that, we're signing off. We'll see you next time.
All right. Take care.